In the 1930s, Korea entered a period of gloom. For the previous 5 decades, South Korea had been swept into a conflict between China and Japan. It reached its peak when it was annexed by Japan in 1910. This marked 35 years of Japanese rule. In it, Koreans have to face confession, labor, and always strive to fight. In this context, their culture and identity are suppressed, pushing many people to adopt Japanese customs to survive. During this time, Libyan Chun is commonly called. Basile sought admission to Waseda University in Tokyo. His admission not only reflects his intelligence, but also the ability to establish relationships with one's Japanese superiors. Wandering around the streets of Tokyo, Basile felt surprise, confusion, fear. With all that they are dominating, the Japanese have achieved something considered unattainable by many Asians against the power of Western colonialism, a challenge that even mighty China has succumbed to. Among all those miracles, a powerful Mitsubishi Corporation, Eisebatsu, also known as the family-controlled business dynasty, caught Basile's attention. It shows real business power, has far-reaching influence, and deep investment in the field of power. But in Japan, a Korean like Basile must be satisfied with playing a subordinate role, hide the doubts that the Japanese are afraid of, can challenge their dominance. These fears are certainly well-founded. March 1938. After experiencing enough things to motivate him to return to Korea, Basile established a small shop at Daegu, name it 3-star store. Perhaps inspired by Mitsubishi's Diamond Ghost, named in Chinese as Samsung Sanhu. Your goal is very clear. Create a business dynasty. Samsung's upward advancement is extraordinary. Like Xiaobang, which accounts for 20% of South Korea's GDP and leading in technological innovation, compete with global giants such as Sony, Apple, and Google. This is Samsung's legend. A dynasty has innovated, warmed its plants, and become a technology giant. Samsung is a complex and influential company. LAN is much deeper than we think. The Samsung we know has 4 main business units. The consumer electronics segment contributes 50% of total revenue, with semiconductors accounting for 30%, and smart home systems account for the rest. It's interesting that Samsung, an innovation-driven company, focusing on hardware again, while the world increasingly favors software and connection systems. We will go deeper into the reasons behind Samsung's lag in software. This involves the struggle with Google, raised the status of Sunday Beach High, now taking on the position of CEO of Google. But Samsung doesn't just have 4 business units. If you zoom in on the structure of the company, going into it, it has more than 250 subsidiaries, and if you look at the whole picture, Samsung larger than we know. Beyond the borders of the United States, Samsung has associates spread across for different categories: electronics, construction machinery, financial services, and many other fields, from advertising companies to resorts. The combination of these 4 categories has far-reaching impact, accounting for more than 20% of South Korea's GDP. In fact, Samsung's international influence spans 4 categories to make countries dependent, especially Vietnam, Samsung's largest manufacturing facility overseas, scattered across more than 10 provinces, About 30 factories account for nearly 30% of Vietnam's GDP. But not all of Samsung's investments are strategic. Some are based on emotion, and perhaps too much so. For example, because Samsung President Wok Holi is a dog lover, Samsung has Back Grubs, the largest dog exhibition in the UK, located about 9,000 kilometers from Seoul, equivalent to 5,500 miles. This becomes a recurring theme when the Lai family's preferences can change the company into many different fields, seemingly only benefiting Lai's own family. Today, the good line is still maintained by Che Lai, who, like his grandfather, will tradition of betrayal and political manipulation, but also a work that began many years ago, since 1910, when his grandfather BC was born. BC was born on February 12, 1910 and Uriangjing Sanam is the youngest of 4 siblings. Their family is a Catholic family, mainly due to the encouragement of their grandfather who shaped the future for their successful businesses. Although BC took over the business directly from his grandfather, but his love for his homeland comes from his father, who actively sponsored the independence movement against Japanese occupation. Even though in their hearts they oppose Japan, but they still maintain a smart appearance before Japan, gain favor and show BC how relationships can be established. The power of the eyes or background kai is how Koreans use it to call the art of subtly recognizing situations. Born in an era of lurking dangers when working abroad, he quickly realized that he needed to work hard or will face the risk of deportation like an uneducated slave labor. So, he spent his childhood memorizing classics like Confucius's words, which later influenced the way he ran Samsung. In April 1930, he entered Tokyo Waseda University to study political science and economics. Everything seemed to be planned perfectly. He will graduate in 3 years, then enter into strategic cooperation to bring glory to Korea. Ironically, BC has peri-peri, a disease that seems to have been forgotten by everyone. Vitamin B1 deficiency disease. People with this disease will experience muscle paralysis and in severe cases can cause heart failure. Forced to drop out of school and return to Korea, BC still refused to surrender. He thought, maybe this is the time I will establish a company. After 8 generous years, in 1938, Samsung was founded. He set up a rice factory with friends. Believe that a basic food like rice will never go out of style. However, in the mid-1930s, the Great Calamity raged, weakened much of the industrial world, and almost pushed them into the abyss of bankruptcy. The journey to reverse the situation and overcome difficulties is very fierce, has limited will not be immune from the harsh changes of time. Long may it last. Their company must be able to weather economic cycles. That's why he started expanding into different fields. In 1939, he was known to own a transportation business with 20 trucks, 1,600 stone fields, a brewery, and of course, his new department store called Samsung Sanho. Everything went well. His strategy in building a multi-industry corporation helped him overcome all storms, including World War II. In 1947, he even owned a university and a local newspaper. Perhaps feeling reassured, he decided to expand it beyond Korea and visited Tokyo, Japan. BC couldn't believe his eyes. He had heard reports that Tokyo was completely destroyed 2 years ago, but seeing it in the flesh really makes him feel like a shrimp. So different from the Tokyo I remember, he thought as he walked through a series of shops around him. Strangely enough, he wanted to get a haircut in Tokyo, so he quickly went and looking for the first haircut he saw. Hello. A crazy middleman greets you. Sit down, please. BC sat down on a plastic chair facing a yellow mirror. Find a haircut, that's not inconsequential. Tokyo, but in front of the context, it seems a bit more luxurious than expected. Just cut according to my head shape. BC hides with his hands. When cutting hair, look left, then right. Carefully cut the penis on both sides of him to ensure symmetry. I think we should cut a little more in this area. It will better suit the shape of your head. BC nodded in response, realizing that the haircut was very neat. He proposed a few more changes. Don't forget to smile before receiving money from BC. The barber showed an even more knowing bow. This gap will be ingrained in BC's mind when he realizes that Cho's brother was oppressed, so he decided to continue living a peaceful life. During the trip, he deeply admired the patience of the Japanese and realized that global success was coming to Japan, and he cannot be complacent with what he has achieved. Clearly, the trip to Japan wasn't just about getting a haircut. He wanted to learn about Zaibatsu's business structure and found that they had been dispersed by allied forces. Instead, it was Keiretsu. The new companies are not run by a family, but by a collection of shareholders. These shareholders form a business network, usually centered around a private bank, to ensure capital when they transact with each other. Keiretsu has planted the ideal structure in PC for Samsung, which eventually becomes a challenge with Korean authorities today. You know, the Lee family still retains control through a complex network of overlapping shares, while minimizing inheritance tax. In South Korea, the maximum inheritance tax for an empire like Samsung is around 50%, a huge fortune if they follow the rules. But in 1947, taxes were not yet something the PCS worried about. Instead, he was very excited. His business trip was a success, so it was time for him to return to Korea. In the early 1950s, things were going very well for some Korean businessmen. So much so that they formed a council and invited the American military to trade with them. Weekly social council and, according to PC, deep reflection on what it means to be human. A question worth pondering on June 25th. In 1950, every Korean would be forced to answer. The Korean War broke out. Outside the PC's house, he could hear voices, the noise of trucks racing on the road. Next was the sound of applause and the sound of music everywhere. South Koreans are optimistic that they can push North Korean forces back to where they came from. Perhaps PC was just as optimistic, until he was awakened from his sleep. It was midnight, and a loud explosion caused a commotion in his house. Looking outside, he saw a large tank in the distance. It's shooting straight south. Strange, he said, that a South Korean tank was shooting south, until he noticed that its turret was flying the North Korean flag. Extremely worried, he realized that the enemy advanced further south. They are now in Seoul. Over the next few weeks, the PC and his family will watch what the Civil War actually did to the country. North Korean Lin and local militia will break into the warehouses, including British warehouses, and looted what was left. The PC even saw a communist commander driving a Chevrolet of recent American production. The car was previously owned by PC himself. In September 1950, after witnessing the trials, went public, PC sold off what was left of Samsung, bought 5 trucks to evacuate Samsung employees and their families as communist forces continued to push deeper into the south. Initially stopping in Daegu, they eventually arrived in Bisan, the last remaining Korean forces. At the southern tip of the peninsula, it was here that Western forces provided strength, needed to force North Korean forces to turn back. During the 3 years of war, Seoul was captured and recaptured the least, 4 times, and led to the deaths of about 3 million Koreans. perhaps more than the number of Koreans who died in World War II. In July 1953, an armistice was signed, and the PC's family has returned from hiding, returned to Seoul, ready to conquer Korea. On the morning of May 1961, PC was walking around the current Okura Hotel, a famous 5-star luxury hotel in Tokyo. He smirked. "I'm the richest person in Korea, but I'm a nobody." In the years after the Korean War, Samsung developed into a joint stock company like Keiretsu in Japan. Vast and ever-expanding, PC's success to date is the combination of relationships and business acumen. He knew well that Korean families were separated and became destitute. Flavors became a luxury afforded to common people, yearning to escape their current situation. One profitable solution is import substitution, the process of importing cheap raw products and selling them on Korean soil. But at that time, import substitution magic was difficult to obtain unless you have some way to reach Sen Manri, the first president of Korea. Fortunately, the financial involvement of his late father, Lee Chang-yu, in the independence movement was not forgotten. The important thing is that we knew his father for a while. During his youth, thanks to his father's connections, he was quickly convinced that he is capable in managing a factory. But more important is in the transportation of goods. If you are granted an import substitution license, you can also handle distribution. In 1953, the first Cheochedan, or Shichai, roughly translated as sugar, was born. Spurred by the success of his sugar mill, he was granted permission, established a rattan weaving factory with the help of Japan. With this new cash flow, he bought a bank in 1957, then bought an insurance company in 1958. Using leverage from the bank, he bought one department stores and a non-educational university. To many people, he has become the most powerful person in Korea, a privilege he feared losing. So he began adopting a darker approach to coping. And in one particular case, he did. His rival was imprisoned for greed. But now, it is the power that he possesses is the reason why his life is at stake. You see, President Ri was overthrown by a military coup, an event that would shape Korea to this day, led by a man named General Baek Chung-hee. General Baek's family is a Confucian family but poor, a profound experience that made General Baek despise normalcy. He grew up admiring Napoleon, eventually joining it, entered the Japanese eunuch army while Korea was still occupied. He served them well, was promoted to Central Italy, and was garrisoned in Manchuria, where he realized the commercial influence the Zaibatsu exerted. According to him, the excessive confiscation of assets has damaged our ability to promote development cannot be denied. Perhaps Mr. Cho thinks they are necessary evils to promote the development of a nation, if only he could control them. After the war, his knowledge helped develop Korea's military forces, and in 1958, he was promoted to general. During his promotion, he noticed President Ri awards contracts based on relationships and created a corrupt society, causing birth. Chaebong, Korean version of Zaibatsu. With the same contempt and disgust, he did gather your forces, control the government, then turned his attention to the business tycoons. That's why BC doesn't feel right at Okura Hotel. I know of all the business tycoons in Korea, I'm definitely at the top of the list. A title that he was very proud of before. Lee-san, there are 2 people looking for you. According to your instructions, I told you not to be here. But they left a letter. A line of words echoed from outside the door. Okay, I'm out here. BC put the letter on the floor and folded the bag to pack his things. When you founded Samsung, the 3-star store, I hope that it represents growth, abundance, and strength. That was his message to the rest of the world, that they would grow as large as the Zaibatsu. That controlled Japan. But General Bob understood the message differently and wrote a letter directly to BC Lee that his business associates had been arrested. And now, like many others, you must fly back to Seoul immediately to negotiate for your life. We will learn about decision-making that Uncle Jun, he has done with the startup BC for Samsung today, and the decline completely changed the reign of the Lee family. In the podcast panel, there are our reenactment. Maybe at that scripted time, network, the character has different thoughts. The content is based on real event research. Thank you for listening.